Welcome back, Astro listeners, to Star Lady Soul Reader Network. This is your host, Media Monk, and I have on the other end of the line our shining star of the zodiac, Star Lady. Hi, Star Lady.
Hello, Media Monk.
And we all know Star Lady is the managing director for the Evolutionary Astrology Network. EAN, as we call it, provides the finest course materials for those people interested in getting certified in evolutionary astrology. And yet we do a lot of other things like forecasting webinars and our new Zoom calls. Oh, we also have an astro library you can kind of take a peek at if you go to www.evolutionaryastrology.net. Always call us at 1-605-348-5111 to ask any questions about the website, the course, or perhaps to schedule your own private time with Star Lady. So, happy new moon of Taurus, honey. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Media Monk. Hello, everyone. We are recording this the day before the new moon of Taurus at just about 8 degrees Taurus. And probably the biggest planetary configurations going on in the sky right now is we're having the third and final Mars-Pluto opposition that the new moon forms a T-square to. We have Jupiter getting ready to square with the nodal axis, north node, south node. And, of course, we have that stellium in late Pisces of north node Pisces, Saturn finishing up in Pisces, Venus finishing up in Pisces post-retrograde cycle, and Neptune at 1 degree Aries still dancing with this Pisces stellium. So those are the three major configurations that are going on. Breaking them down, we just a few days ago had Venus, Saturn, and North Node all in a process of making conjunctions to each other. This is a mixture of Saturn involved, saying what's real, what's bottom line, what's manifesting on physical levels, what is not. And then we have Venus in Pisces, again, direct from its retrograde cycle. North Node, the evolution of our ego in Pisces. So what inspires us? What's our deepest? The tail end of Pisces is the end of the 360-degree circle of the zodiac. So what inspires us? What gives us the deepest values and meaning in our life, as I like to say? Or what is that relationship with source energy on our most direct Saturn levels? Isn't it interesting that Pope Francis, the first pope named Francis after Francis of Assisi, I think, he was, the ancestor who renounced wealth and really stood up for mercy and compassion and the poor and the homeless and all species. He was known as a great animal lover. And so here we have Pope Francis, who embodied many of these attributes. And what does he do? He crosses over back to that spirit world as the stellium is happening in late Pisces. No one's a perfect human. And, we can go talk about all the patriarchal distortions of Catholicisms and popes in the Catholic world, but he is the best embodiment we have of love, mercy, compassion, on the broadest levels. And that's really what the stellium in late Pisces is asking all of us to find for ourselves in our own world. even as it appears that the former Pluto in Capricorn patriarchal distortions are really crunching down. Can we step back far enough and realize this is the last gasp of patriarchy and how it is more and more consciously dying out? So what can you take from the stellium for your own inspiration? Jupiter is hanging out at about 20 degrees Gemini, smack dab in the middle of Donald Trump's planets in Gemini, and him getting an inkling that he doesn't get to rule the world. There are larger forces of power out there than him. But for many of us, this Jupiter and Gemini, and by the way, it won't have its square to the nodal axis until mid-May. My calendar says the 18th, about 25 degrees, Jupiter, Gemini, North Node Pisces, South Node Virgo. So for many of us, when Jupiter squares the nodes, it means that we can potentially, not always, but it means we can get stuck in our beliefs. You know, our South Node ego wants to cling to the past, even if it's distorted, even if it is the woundedness of a Virgo that wants to beat ourselves up, inner, outer criticism, with us inside, outside of us, with others, all of those little details. And then that North Node in Pisces, is it finding that deepest value and meaning in our life, or are we going for the wounded distortions of the addictions or head in the sand, denial, ignoring everything, just wanting to check out? And so Jupiter and Gemini, the twins, this or that, this or that. How can I put my feet on the ground and recognize that I am one of those imperfect humans, as is everybody else on the planet? And what can I do to be honest with myself, Jupiter? Decide where I'm at, what decisions are best for me, Gemini, and then move forward with my own faith and my own inspiration as best as I can do that. Now, Jupiter is within orb of squaring the nodes of the moon pretty much most of the way through April and all of May and even into the beginning of June. So you could almost stretch it into 2 months of Jupiter square the nodes. So get in touch again with where your beliefs are at consciously. You know, we're finishing up Jupiter and Gemini. It goes into Cancer, I think, in early June, if I remember correctly. Let me get this. Jupiter in Cancer, June 9th. And so, right brain intuitive Jupiter is in left brain, analyze it to pieces, Gemini. And it's finishing up a year cycle. So Jupiter in Gemini direct from its retrograde cycle is now saying, these are my choices. And this is who I am, and this is who I'm not. And so here's that focal point heading into this whole month of May, where we make these type of discernments, where we make these type of intuitive decisions. This is who I am. This is what I believe about myself. This is what I believe about my place in the world. This is what I think and believe about the world, and this is how I'm going to choose to participate in going forward. So Mars makes the third and final opposition to Pluto on April 26th, the day we're recording, the day before that new moon, April 27th, again, just shy of 8 degrees Taurus. Remember, Mars had a retrograde cycle last fall, winter, in Leo Cancer. Mars had that first opposition 2 days before the USA presidential election at 29 3/4, Mars Cancer, Pluto Capricorn, that utter depression for many of us that came from the election results. Well, now we've had a little bit of reflection time. We've had a little bit of detachment time, Pluto and Aquarius. They had their second opposition while Mars was retrograde, January 3rd, right around New Year's, at about 1 degree Mars retrograde Leo, Pluto 1 degree Aquarius, kind of before the shocks of Trump's inauguration and presidency starting to take over. So now here we are the third time around. And Mars is our conscious desires, Pluto our deepest unconscious desires. This planetary pair is how our souls evolve, exhausting the separating desires until eventually that desire to know why we're here and what our lessons are becomes stronger, stronger, stronger. Well, in consensus world, we're not really conscious of that broad soul journey of manifesting and exhausting desires. Consensus world, Mars, Pluto, I just want the power. You know, Mars is the old ruler of Scorpio. Pluto's the new ruler of Scorpio. Scorpio is where we merge in many ways. It's the sexual merging, but it's also the merging of resources or the merging of something we perceive to have more power than us to metamorphose and osmosis that into us and become more than we were before the merging. And so in a consensus world, which is approximately 7 out of 10 souls all the way across the planet from EA's perspective, that consensus world, you know, can just get caught up in I want the power. So it's power over, power under, power over, power under. And you can look at it from Donald Trump's observations, and, you know, he's on his revenge tour. Here's a little detail for you. You know, he's going after these universities, and he went after Columbia University and threatened to take away $400 billion or $400 million? $400 million in some of their research funding. And they acquiesced, and he still took away the money. Well, about 20 years ago, whoever was president of Columbia University back in Donald Trump's apprentice days or real estate days, maybe both, he offered to sell them a building next to one of his hotels for $400 million, and it was too far from their university in New York City. They turned it down. So here's Donald Trump, 20-some years later, choosing to take away funding for the exact amount of money that they wouldn't spend buying one of his buildings he was trying to push on them. There's that example of power over. But Donald Trump is also getting power under lessons, known as the stock market, treasury bonds, and the Federal Reserve. So, stay tuned. We'll see how this turns out as time goes by, but these are some of those major examples. And so this brings us to this new moon that is halfway between this Mars-Pluto opposition. And Taurus, Leo, Mars, Aquarius, Pluto, these are fixed signs of the zodiac. And fixed is persevering. It's also stubborn. You know, we need to sometimes persevere in order to create some of our, or to achieve some of our goals. But we also have that fixed energy of, I'm right, you're wrong, I got the power and you don't in this T-square. Now, the new moon, I'm going to refer you again to some EA mantras I created a long time ago. The mantra for Taurus, I create self-reliance with every metamorphosis. I create self-reliance with every metamorphosis. The self-reliance is the Taurian energy. The metamorphosis is the Scorpio polarity that pulls that rug out from underneath us and brings the death and rebirth of whatever we have to release. How are we going to rebirth? How are we going to renew? And so we will all, during this time period, end of April, early May, go through, you know, our own little death and rebirth, our own little areas of recognizing that we thought we had something going on that we were in charge of or managing, and the universe wipes it out away from us. How do we choose with this T-square on the new moon, focusing it? How do we choose to rebirth? How do we choose to deepen that inner emotional self-reliance? New moon, Taurus. I can renew myself. I can feel okay. I can feel my balance and comfort regardless of what's going on in my world. We also have Venus and Mercury changing signs, and as we approach the full moon, we're going to have Pluto turn stationary retrograde. So not only do we have this T-square of Mars opposing Pluto, the third one is doing it while Pluto is standing still and getting ready to turn retrograde for 5 months at about 4 degrees Aquarius. When Pluto turns stationary retrograde, it means that our soul has reached a limit with our desire nature in some way. And Pluto retrograde is throwing off old desires that no longer serve our soul. How is that showing up for you? Maybe it's happening in major ways. Maybe it's happening in a little subtle ways. Again, probably the whole message is, what doesn't work in my world anymore? What am I being asked to shed? What am I being asked to release? How stubbornly fixed signs, T-square new moon, am I trying to hold on? How gently can I recognize releasing and letting go? And how will I fill that space up? Releasing the past. Am I going to repeat it all over again? Attract it right back in? Or could I maybe work with Venus direct going into Aries and starting its new annual cycle with valuing something different that then allows me to evolve my desire nature? Venus went into Aries, retrograded back into Pisces, now goes into Aries one more time, April 30th through June 5th. Oh, by the way, if you were watching social media where they were talking about the smiley face that the planets were going to make, yes, it was the Venus-Saturn conjunction with the balsamic moon, meaning that you had to be looking at this April 24, 25, 20, maybe 26, in the early morning pre-dawn sky, before the light of the sun came. It was not an evening sky phenomena. It was there, but it was there in the early mornings. Again, back to that Piscean energy of what is important to us. So Venus is now going to go in Aries because of a finishing up of its retrograde cycle, a fairly long transit in Aries. A whole month, April 30th through June 5th. This is initiating new values. Post-Venus retrograde, what really is important to me. How do I want to speak up? How do I want to give and receive in my relationships with others? How do I want to give and receive with myself? And here's Pluto saying, throw things off, throw things off, throw things off. Well, Mercury is part of this picture. Mercury went into Aries April 16th. Remember, it had a retrograde cycle in Aries back to Pisces, and now it went into Aries again. Mercury was in Aries April 16th through May 10th. So just before the full moon on May 12th, Mercury's got a long cycle through Aries. It's been, moving us forward on a left brain mental level, sparking new ideas, sparking new things. It's kind of, working in tandem with Venus here for about the first 10 days of May, going, how do we move forward? How do we use these spring renewals and rebirths? How do we use the annual spring renewals and rebirths? And so again, Pluto retrograde is sandwiched between them, turning retrograde May 4th, almost 4 degrees Aquarius. Pluto turning stationary retrograde in Aquarius, my 4 words for Aquarius. Detach, objectify, liberate, innovate. How do I detach from whatever's going on? How do I look at it as broadly as possible in an objective way? What is it that I need to release, liberate myself from the past in some way? And then how do I innovate, filling up that space in new ways for my soul's growth and evolution? When Venus goes into Aries, April 30th, on May 2nd, it makes its third and final conjunction to Neptune at 1 degree Aries. So we've got plenty of opportunities for inspiration in this whole death and rebirth process going on over the next couple of weeks. Pluto stationary retrograde. It's just that evolving door of evolution. Birth, growth, bloom, decay, death, rebirth, and start all over again. How is this happening in your world in minor ways? How is it happening in major ways? And if you're a gardener like Star Lady, how are you just enjoying all of these spring renewals that are going on? Again, may you deepen your inner self-reliance with every metamorphosis that takes place in your life. Hey, Media Monk, I just get into my little rattles and just go blah, 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 blah.
It was perfect. It was perfect. Well, that's a natural ending point. That part about the opposition, Leo-Aquarius opposition, it's really about validating yourself from within rather than an incessant desire, Leo, to impress others. And that's the most salient thing I got from the podcast today. So thank you very much for that.
You're most welcome. All right, everyone, thank you.
If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, please be enjoying yourself outdoors in all your spring renewals.
And until next time, move with joy and passion on this exciting journey to the core of our souls. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.